Cash Flow Code. And my guest today is Paul Alex, and Paul is the CEO of ATM Together. ATMs are automatic teller machines, those things you put your card into and you get cash out of. And he has a private company doing that, which you may have seen around the country from time to time. And he teaches people how to get into the ATM business. So let's bring Paul on and we'll talk to him about his entrepreneurial journey. Hey, Paul, how are you today?
Good. How you doing, Josh?
I'm doing well. Thanks a lot for joining me. So, how did you get started in the ATM business? I mean, that's not like a business everyone goes into.
Yeah, it's actually a funny story. I was in law enforcement for the past 7 years. Started in 2014. Within 2 years, became a detective. Was doing investigation work from narcotics to homicide to absolutely everything you could think about, even special victims unit, just like the show. And the last 2 years of law enforcement, I had a coworker who was actually researching for ATMs for years, but what was stopping him was his paralysis analysis. So essentially, he would do all this research and research and research, but never do the first step to getting his actual ATM business started. So when he had told me this casual conversation one day, we were eating lunch, and I was asking him, man, I'm working 60 to 100-hour work weeks, man. I'm trying to figure out a way to make a second source of income, but I just don't know how. And then also, I didn't really have a lot of time since I was working so much. Essentially, he's like, Paul, man, this is a great opportunity. You should look into it. And that's what I did. It's so simple. Black and white business, very old school. You're using cash. Majority of people that I tell I do the ATM business, they're like, wow, I would never expect you to jump from law enforcement into ATMs because essentially people think ATMs is a boring business. And I understand that, but I tell them like, hey, usually the businesses that are bringing you the cash flow are essentially boring businesses. They're not this flashy, social media business that you see nowadays. So I jumped into ATMs while I was actually working my 9 to 5. I was able to go from 1 to 30 ATM locations. I know before the podcast, you said you were in vending for 20 years, man, which is phenomenal. I know quite a few clients in the vending machine industry, and from there it grew. It grew, and now we're here a few years later.
So, one of my questions about this is, ATMs require cash. I mean, you don't just go put an ATM machine and people throw cash in there. How did you fund that business?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a great question. Essentially, I saved up. I always I always get actual clients or someone who wants to become a mentee of mine. They ask me like, "Well, Paul, I don't have like $10,000 to invest into my first ATM or have the cash to actually put inside of that machine." And I tell them, "Look, the first thing you need to do is find a job that you're going to be able to go ahead and actually save a good amount of your cash." And that's one thing that my parents taught me growing up. Essentially, I come from humble beginnings. I come from an immigrant family. My mom is Peruvian. My dad is Mexican. They worked extremely hard to buy their first home together and raise three children. Two of my sisters went off to school to become nurses. Essentially, I was like the black sheep of the family. I went into corporate sales and then I went into law enforcement and then finally entrepreneurship. But then I've always been good at saving. So I was very frugal during my venture at law enforcement. And because I worked a ton of overtime, I was able to save quite a bit during my venture there. So initially, the cash that I did use for my ATM venture, I did use it from my savings. And what I can tell everybody is that if you're not familiar with using credit cards, is to start researching credit cards, due diligence, right? And that's what I did. To buy my first 6 ATMs, I actually leveraged using zero interest credit cards for the first 12 months. That gave me a little bit of wiggle room to now leverage the actual cash flow that I had in my savings to put inside of the ATM, let it generate some revenue for me, and then I could start paying off those credit cards within the first year.
What kind of margin is there in an ATM machine? I mean, I go in and I use my card and it costs me 3% of $100. That's $3.
Correct. Yeah, so with ATMs, roughly people get confused and they say, "Wow, it's you're only going to get $3 and somebody's withdrawing $100. How is that even sustainable? How are you making money?" Well, essentially the ATM business is very simple. You're actually letting the consumer, your client, borrow that money. The processing network, which is essentially in the ATM industry, it's the network that facilitates the actual transactions from your ATM to the banking network, then back to your business banking account. So that money that you're essentially putting inside of that machine, it's going to come back to you every single business day, depending on how many clients are actually withdrawing cash. So essentially, you just need roughly just to start off $2,000 to $3,000 to load up your machine. It'll come back to your business checking account along with the fees that you're actually charging your consumer for withdrawing that amount of money. Now, what happens after the money goes back to your bank account? Well, this is sort of like the old school part of it. It's not automated. This is what I call semi-passive business with cash ATMs. Is you go to the bank, you withdraw the money, and then you go back and you load it up yourself. You can do this once, twice, three times a month, ultimately up to you, depending on how much money you want to put inside of the ATM. ATMs can hold up to $20,000 in $20 denominations.
So I'm a little bit confused there. So I'm still sitting there saying, I withdraw $100 from I go and use your ATM. I withdraw $100. How much of that $100 goes into your account?
Correct. So you withdraw that $100. That
Yep.
$100 that you withdraw, okay?
Yep.
I get back that $100, but then you're getting charged that $3.
Right.
You're getting charged that fee. So
Yep.
essentially, I get the $100 back and I charge you the fee. So I'm getting that fee back. Now, essentially, depending on your ROI is going to be based on your actual cost of the startup of that essential location. Now, let's say machine is a roughly around $2,100. Let's say the internet modem will cost you around $150. Let's say all in, you're around $3,200. Okay, roughly, I've seen it where you're at a 100% ROI within 5 to 6 months of total cost startup, or sometimes on average, it takes about 12 months to get the complete 100% ROI on your actual startup.
So that 3% actually, if you go to the machine, and this is important for people to understand because gets to be really complicated. You're saying
Correct.
$3, but that's not very much. But if I take $3 and I go to that machine every 2 weeks and I reload my machine every 2 weeks, I'm actually not getting 3%. I'm really getting over the course of a year, 3% times 26. So it's really a 72% ROI or 72% return you get on that cash, which is really pretty significant. And that's how the ROI business makes a ton of sense. So you're sitting there saying, and this is something which I find it's a passive business, sort of, but someone's got to go and service those machines.
Correct, correct.
So
And
that's not pass.
essentially,
That's not passive,
no, it's not passive, it's semi-passive.
right?
And this is what I tell people because I've built a $15 million business within the past 3 years off of doing this concept.
Yep.
And the reason why I tell people this is semi passive is essentially because, yes, when you look at it based on the perspective of what you do for a living. Now, take my lifestyle, for example. I come from the law enforcement lifestyle, adrenaline rush, dealing with the worst of the worst in one of the worst, most dangerous cities in the United States, Oakland, California. I worked close to 100-hour work weeks. And
Yep.
during that time in my late 20s, it doesn't do much. You could go back to sleep for 3 hours and go hit the streets again, right?
Right.
So to me, working this business was as passive as possible. I didn't even think that you could do this because essentially you're making your money work for you, right?
Right.
So depending on what you do for a living, this might not be for everybody, but essentially there is a market for this. Like I always tell everybody in every niche, um, you're always going to have an avatar on every offer, any product that you have. Essentially, you just have to be able to articulate and clearly explain what the service is and what the actual product can provide for the consumer. So for this opportunity, when it came up to me, I thought I hit a gold mine, man. I mean, within my first 3 months, I was making $3,000 net after all my expenses off of 6 locations. And I was only going to refill these machines for a couple hours on the weekend once a month. So to me, compared to what I was doing before, this was as semi passive as possible. Now, if we want to get into passive, I have a new offer where we start getting into BTMs, and that is Bitcoin teller machines. Now,
Okay.
yeah, that's where we essentially,
Okay, but
you run with crypto.
let's just stay with ATMs because we're getting a little
Sure,
exotic here.
sure.
So you're doing $14 million a year,
Mhm.
correct?
Yes,
How many machines do you have?
I have 30 machines. So
And you're
within the
making $14
ATM,
million off 30 machines?
correct. So let me explain this part. So
Okay.
the 30 machines, I make roughly about 10 to about 12K a month off of the 10 to 12 to I'm sorry. From the 30 machines, I make about 10 to 12K a month, okay? Which is essentially what covers my expenses for my living expenses and all that jazz. That's what made me financially free, basically.
Yep.
Now I transitioned into the online space after not being on there for the past 7 to 8 years. So after not being on the online space for 7 to 8 years, I go, wow, this is amazing. So I ended up building an online community where I saw there was a void in the ATM industry market. The void was simple. The void was that majority of people, they're very busy or essentially they just don't want to do the work. What is the hardest part behind vending and the ATM industry? And I know you know this. It's essentially finding the locations. Locations, location, location, right? So essentially, that's what we do. We facilitate a business in a box for the clients. So essentially, majority of the $15 million that we have generated in the past 3 years since January of 2021 has essentially been from my actual online brand, ATM Together. Now, with ATM Together, we have facilitated over 2,000 clients. Actually, it's at 2,100 clients now. We are steadily growing and we're looking to be at around 3 million a month based on all the offers across the board starting in the next 2 months. Right now, we're at about 2 million a
So
month.
the $14 million or $15 million you're talking about is mostly through you helping other people get into this business.
It's facilitating the actual machines, it's facilitating the actual locations, the infrastructure, and hiring the techs and basically everything to facilitate other people's business. Correct.
So you have to so I'm assuming you have a team that finds locations.
Yes, I have multiple call centers. I have about 35 employees year to date since I started this. It's a
Okay.
pretty big operation. Correct.
Yeah, so it's not. I mean, this is the thing that when I got your publicity stuff, I said, I hope we're
Mhm.
not going to have a scam. Otherwise, we're going to have a big argument that goes on here. You don't have a simple business. You actually have a pretty complicated business. So, what was
Correct.
the biggest challenge you had getting to where you are right now?
What? I'm sorry. Did you say it's like scam? Are you calling my business
No,
a
no, no, no.
scam
I'm not
or?
calling it a scam. I'm not calling it a
Okay,
scam. I'm
sure.
what I said was I was afraid I was going to have that conversation, but we don't. You have
Oh
a
yeah. No,
you have a very complicated business, and I'm curious, what was the biggest
sure.
challenge you had to get to where you are right now? Because building 35 people to do this business from scratch is a ton of work, and it's really, really hard. And for
It
that, you got
is.
to be congratulated. So I'm
Thank
just
you.
curious, what was the biggest problem you had to get to where you are right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest problem that I had to get through it is just the limiting beliefs. So ultimately, it goes a little bit back into my background. If I didn't have the actual experience of being a top producing detective back when I was in law enforcement, actually setting up cases that had to do with taking down some of the world's largest narcotic traffickers, leading hundreds of federal agents, doing multiple raids in multiple cities, and be able to actually plan this out, run the logistics, be a leader, which I always say lead by example. That experience led me to being a successful entrepreneur. So the biggest key factor was just actually self education. And self education is absolutely everything. I've invested over $300,000 in the past 2 years in self education to build a multi-million dollar business. And I think that's the biggest step that a lot of people actually miss and they misinterpret. They think that, oh, I'm going to start a business. It's simple. People make it look simple. It is not simple. Even an
Well,
ATM
it
business,
actually is simple, it's just not easy. I mean, this is the
it
thing that I
is,
tell people all the time is
yeah.
that business is very simple, but it's not easy.
Right. Well,
So,
once you learn it, it's simple. Now that I know business, I know how
yeah,
to build the infrastructure behind it. It's a game. It's a game. It's
yeah,
how you play the game now. But
yeah.
back then, what you don't know is what you don't know, right? And if you don't have the mentors, you don't have the environment built around you. Just take my case for example, okay? This is why a lot of entrepreneurs, especially when they go into business, they're out of business within the first year, even the first, second, or third year. Essentially, they don't even make a profit the first few years. My business, it made profit within 1.7. After I started actually engaging ATM Together, started launching it myself, took it from one to about 5 employees the first year, and then steadily started growing it, growing it, growing it. But when growth comes, you have to continue to keep self educating yourself. I then brought in people that were actually more intelligent than me in different spaces as far as building systems, operations, logistics, the call center. I had to go actually send one of my employees out to Kosovo to train an entire staff out there. So essentially it's it's a whole lot of moving parts. But what I can tell you is my experience on my previous job of law enforcement, if I did not have that, none of this would have been possible. So I came to the stage of full-time entrepreneurship at the age of 29, which I could say it's a blessing because I actually had to go through two careers in order to figure out life. And experience is everything to me. Experience and then self-educate. Just sorry, self-educating yourself.
Well, so let me ask you about delegation because to get to
Sure.
35 employees, you have to learn how to delegate. And that's, in my opinion, the
Yes.
hardest skill a private business owner ever needs to learn. So, how did you become good at delegating?
Yeah, absolutely. So I learned this at a very young age. I come from different roles. So give you a great example. When I was 18, I actually got into the nightclub business. I used to throw my own events. And this was as I know it sounds hilarious because I was a cop and I was in corporate sales,
Yeah, no, no,
but
that's
but essentially, that was my first entrepreneur role, was being a club promoter. And we did fairly well at that age. We didn't know what we were doing, but we did fairly well. And it was just promoting an event, but we would get 1,000, 1,500 people on a Saturday night at this one place where everybody would go have fun and we made a profit or whatnot. And what I learned at that age is that you can't do everything yourself. I needed my friends to help me out. So already from the age of 18, just from that little experience, I knew that you need a team in order to be successful because you can't do everything on your own. And there's not enough time in the day in order for you to execute on absolutely everything. So essentially, when I went into law enforcement, okay, it was the exact same thing. I was on a very unique task force that was undercover capacity task force that we were assigned to take some of the biggest narcotic traffickers in the area where we are in our county. So essentially, we were very busy. We had about 20 cases a week, and we all had a delicate role in that team. Without one of the team members, the whole mission wouldn't work. That added more to the fire. That added more to the experience that, hey, I need to be a leader. I need to actually tell people what to do. Hey, it is what it is, right? You learn from the experience. And I learned it from my mentors at the time too. My sergeant, my lieutenant, my mentor who was a one of the best detectives in the area. They groomed me to be like that. So then when I started ATM Together, okay, it was a whole lot different than me running my own tangible ATM business. Because with the ATM business, yes, anyone could go and load up the machines themselves. They just need time to do that. But essentially, how can you work smarter, not harder, right? I started delegating people going to do my maintenance. I started delegating the cash refills. Essentially, the same thing within the vending machine industry, correct? Where who's going to go and load up the actual products in your machine? You would probably hire somebody to go do that, but you make less profit. But at the end of the day, now you're making your time work for you, right? So with ATM Together, I found key leaders that I basically mentored. I told them, look, this is what we need to do. We need to delegate certain portions of the business in order for us to grow. And I looked at what moves the needle the most, which is client acquisition and then customer fulfillment. As long as we're able to master those two aspects of the company, then we were going to able to grow really fast. And that's just off of experience.
So you're an extraordinary young guy. I got to tell you that.
Thank you.
I've been around businesses for almost 50 years now, and I beat you by a few years to starting as my own business journey. But it's the stuff you're doing is really, really good. And the thing that you hit on, which I would like our listeners to really pay attention to, $300,000 investing into his own education. Now, you didn't go to school to get an MBA for that. You did it the smart way. You said, here's what I need to learn. Here's the skills I need to learn. Here's what I'm having a problem with. And now I'm going to go find a way to learn it. Now, I'm assuming some of these things were 20, 30, 40, $50,000 for you to do.
Oh, yeah, Josh. It was quite expensive. And I'm going to tell you this. The first time I ever invested, what I'm going to say is a huge chunk of money was about $30,000. And that was $30,000 to someone who was generating roughly about $600,000 in online sales from his business. And he was only 23 years old.
Right.
So think about so let's I mean let's think about that. Like at that time, I'm 30 years old. I have all of this life experience. I was a top cop. I was a corporate sales manager in my prior past. But this kid who literally just got out of college and jumped online because this is his era. This is what he was exposed to growing up. He was able to leverage the online, system and then go ahead and expand his actual brand, expand his niche, and figure out the code. What you say, business is easy, but once you learn it, once you know the
Right.
proven strategy on how you do it,
Actually, it's
because
not
what I
easy. It's simple. That's my mantra. Simple,
simple.
not easy.
It's simple. It is. It's almost like building blocks. It's almost like Tetris. At the end of the day, what you don't know is what you don't know. But the
Yeah.
first hump that most entrepreneurs or most 9 to 5ers that are not in the space yet that they have to get through is their limiting beliefs. And
Yeah.
growing up, I was very comfortable because everyone around my environment was very comfortable. Once again, I come from a humble family. I come from an immigrant family that only knows the old school American dream. The old school American dream, in my eyes, is hey, go to school, get a good paying job, go get that mortgage that you want on that house, retire, grow kids, all that jazz. And I understand that. And that's still a
So
good life.
yeah. So
But
Paul, unfortunately, I got to cut you off because
sure.
we've already run over time a little bit. So uh, we could go on for another episode, and I think I would like to have you come back again because I want to work with you on what it's going to take to get from 35 to 100 employees, which is a whole different ballgame. But
Yeah,
at any rate,
for sure.
I'm going to bet there's some folks listening and say, "Gee, this sounds like an interesting business. I want to learn more." how would they find you?
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. You guys could find me on two sources. Number one is going to be my main website. That's www.atmtogether.com. And then my second is my Instagram. And that's simple. It's going to be Paul Alex Espinoza. That's going to be Espinoza.
Cool. And I've got two things I'd like you to do. First is this is episode 404, I think, or 405. I didn't look before I started, which means I've been doing this podcast for quite a while now. And I would love to have you go wherever you're listening to this and give us an honest rating review. It always helps people find us. And the second thing is we have a program called the Financial Freedom Accelerator. And essentially what it is it helps you if you own a private business and how to become financially free from your business. And Paul is well on his way to doing that. He might say, gee, I'm not there yet, but that's, what happens. And for folks who are not financially free yet, we help you find a strategy or strategies that will get you there. It's really easy to learn more about, and I hope you will go and check it out. You go to www.sustainablebusiness.co/freedom talk, all one word. That'll tell you a little bit about the program, and you get a chance to have a conversation with me if you want. So this is Paul Alex. You're with Josh Patrick. You're at Cracking the Cashflow Code. Thanks a lot for stopping by. I hope to see you back here really